From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Welcome to the Library of Congress. I'm John Cole, and I want to thank everyone for coming here, and believe it or not, we're close to being on time, and we're not only all here, but we have a few extra folks who are going to be enjoying this morning's talk in celebration of Children's Book Week. This is a very special event. I'm John Cole. I'm the director of an office called the Center for the Book in the Library of Congress, which means I get to think all of the time about the importance of books and reading and literacy and libraries. And sometimes I even get time to read, and I reread wonderful books. For example, this weekend I just happened to reread a remarkable book called The Giver. Now, if this is your first visit to the Library of Congress, please raise your hand. First time at the Library of Congress. Lots of hands. Well, we're very happy to have you here. This is the biggest library in the world, but many people don't even know that it's free and it's open to the public. So I'm hoping that you will return many times, and especially to visit our Young Readers Center. Our Young Readers Center is in our historic building. It means our first building, named for Thomas Jefferson, which is across the street. And the Young Readers Center is a special place for readers 16 years old and younger. And you need to have an adult with you, but it's a terrific place with a book collection, a place to browse, a place for people to hover while they are getting ready to visit the Library of Congress. Now, I know you know a little bit about us, and I want to hear a little bit about you. I've heard a rumor that today we have students from 6 different schools. And if this is true, I would like to check attendance. And I'd like to hear, and you can do it by raising your hands, you don't need to scream too loudly, but let's see what happens. Sidwell Friends School from Washington, D.C. Over here. Oh, little scream is okay. Oh, there we go. National Cathedral School from Washington, D.C. That's about right. It's about the right level. After all, this is a library, but it is a special library, as you're already learning. Hyde Park Addison Elementary School in Washington, D.C. There we go. That was good. Capitol Hill Day School, a neighbor in Washington, D.C. Emmanuel High School from Springfield, Virginia. A few people, they're all the way in the back. And Calverton High School in Huntington, Maryland. And somewhere, a little birdie has told me one of the students is a great-great-granddaughter of a former Librarian of Congress. His name was L. Quincy Mumford, and he was the director of the Library of Congress from 1954 to 1974. And I have a special interest in the library's history and also in Mr. Mumford. He was the first Librarian of Congress that I met when I came way back in 1966. But his great-great-granddaughter is Caroline Holt. Carolyn, will you wave? You are here. There you are. So you have a special welcome to the Library of Congress. Now I would like to introduce you to our donors, the people who are responsible for this wonderful celebration of Children's Book Week 2014. Our donors and sponsors are Marcia and Barney Eskin and their son Lee, and they are making this event possible in honor of their son Jonah. The Eskin family has generously supported these talks for 5 years, and I would like them to stand and be introduced to you. Please. I've already mentioned that this is the Library of Congress kickoff of Children's Book Week, which is a national event sponsored by the Children's Book Council, one of the partners of the Center for the Book, and Every Child a Reader, plus, of course, the Center for the Book and our Young Readers Center. We are very honored that this year's Eskin Lecture discussion with Lois Lowry is our contribution to the celebration. Before I get the program rolling, though, I want to tell you about a couple of other activities here for Children's Book Week. One of them is a writing contest called A Book That Shaped Me, that is sponsored by the Library of Congress in connection with our National Book Festival. This summer essay contest is administered as part of the summer reading programs at participating public libraries now in Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia, Delaware, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. And to enter this contest, students entering 5th or 6th grade who are eligible to participate simply write a one-page essay about a book that has made a difference in their lives and submit it in person at a participating public library. Top winners will receive up to $300 in gift cards and prizes and will be honored here at a ceremony at the Library of Congress in October. All students who enter the contest can pick up a free contest prize pack at the Library of Congress National Book Festival, which this year is August 30th in the Walter E. Washington Convention Center. Now, more information and entry forms are on that back table as you leave, and it would be wonderful if many of you who are here also enter this contest. On the back table, you also will find information about the Center for the Book and the Young Readers Center. And in the Young Readers Center and Center for the Book brochures, you'll also learn about Letters About Literature and River of Words, other student youth projects that we have. One more word about the book festival. We have a terrific young people's program. It is taking place, I have to admit, not only indoors in the Washington Convention Center, but on Labor Day Saturday. Now, we are turning that into an advantage, and we encourage families to participate. The book festival will begin at 10 in the morning and go through the evening, and we will have at least 3 different pavilions for young people. We will have for younger children, also a picture book pavilion, and also young adult writers and readers will be participating. So I hope that you will take advantage of this and watch for the publicity. I should also say this book signing is a big part of both the book festival, and today book signing is going to take place now, and I'm finally to the point where I can introduce our book signer and our writer. It is now my pleasure to introduce one of the world's most beloved and versatile authors for children and young adults. Lois Lowry is the author of more than 40 books, including the popular Anastasia Krupnik series. She has sold millions of books worldwide and twice received the prestigious Newbery Medal, once for Number the Stars and once for The Giver. Other honors she has earned include the Boston Globe Horn Book Award, the Dorothy Canfield Fisher Award, the California Young Readers Medal, and the Mark Twain Award. Furthermore, if we look at her internationally, for her contributions as a young people's writer, she was a finalist in the 2000 and the U.S. nominee again in 2004 for the Hans Christian Andersen Award, which is really the highest recognition that can be given to creators of children's books. And in 2007, she received the Margaret A. Edwards Award for her contribution to young adult literature. Today, Lois is going to talk about how her book, The Giver, has been made into a film. Please welcome Lois Lowry once now. Now, Lois is being joined by Nikki Silver, one of the film's producers. Nikki is an Emmy Award winning producer, Her love for young adult literature has prompted her to option and produce a number of books for television and film. Her production of The Giver, forthcoming, stars Academy Award winners Jeff Bridges and Meryl Streep and singer Taylor Swift. Please welcome Nikki Silver and Lois Lowry. Nikki will lead the discussion, followed by a question and answer period. One more round of applause for both of them.
Thank you, John. Thank you. It's a great honor to be here. This is a very fun thing for me to do, to be able to, one of my heroes too, Lois Lowry, to be able to interview you. So, Lois, let's start.
All right.
Why don't you tell us how you started writing? I mean, it's a good place to start. I know you're a photographer as well, but what is it about writing?
I started seriously believing that I would be a writer when I grew up, when I was about the age of probably the youngest kids in this room, probably 8, 9 years old. And somewhere along the way, somebody doing research on me at the University of Utah sent me a copy of a letter that I had written to a magazine when I was 10 years old, and which was published in that magazine. And at the end of the letter, it said, I am writing a novel. It's called A Dog Named Lucky. I am on chapter 13. I have no memory of that. I don't think it was a lie, though, because at that age, age 10, I was always writing what I thought of as a novel. Chapter 13 probably meant 13 pages of my little notebook. And I will tell you, those of you who want to be writers or who are working on being writers, that about chapter 13 is when it gets to be very hard. It's easy to begin. Ideas are out there. Characters are out there forming in my imagination, and it's very easy for me to start out. And it's actually easy to end as well. But it's when you get to the middle that it gets very hard. And nowadays, of course, at my age, and this is how I make my living, I struggle through that part. I don't quit on chapter 13. I was able to quit when I was 10 and move on to other things like hopscotch or softball. But at any rate, writing was what I wanted to do, what I wanted to be, and I went on to major in writing at college when I was 17 years old.
Did you always imagine that you would write for a young adult audience? Did you have that in mind when you first?
No, and it's interesting to me looking back because I saw myself as a writer for adults. Of course, I thought I would write the great American novel someday when I was studying in college, but this was the 1950s. And I had a boyfriend in college who was 2 years older than I, and he graduated, and I was just a sophomore. I had just turned 19, and so he was going off to do what one does after college graduation, and so we got married, and I dropped out. And then I was still creative, but in a different way, because I had a baby when I was 21, I had a baby when I was 22, I had a baby when I was 24, I had a baby when I was 25, and so I did not, for a long period of time, have time to do the writing I had hoped to do. Now, what surprises me is that looking back, I remember that our house with all those children was filled with books, and that I read to them every night. And probably I made up stories for them, but it never occurred to me to write for kids. And so later, when I went back and finished college and went to graduate school and started writing professionally, and had also studied photography in graduate school, so I was a photojournalist, as they call it, never occurred to me to write for kids. And it took a publisher to point out to me that that was something I might enjoy, might be good at. A publisher came to me and said, would you consider writing a book for young people? And so that's when I wrote my first book for kids. I was 40 years old at that time when that book was published. Took me a while, even though I'd been writing for magazines before that.
Well, we're all grateful to that publisher. So
Well,
it's amazing how
I am
certain
too.
people can,
I'm
change a
grateful,
course
too,
of.
because it alerted me to the fact that A, this was something I enjoyed.
Right.
B, it was something I was pretty good at. But C, and most importantly, when I began to get the response from kids for that first book, this is before email, so the response came in the form of letters. Remember letters? And I began to perceive what a difference books can make in the lives of young people. Now, I tend to read adult books because I'm an adult. I like to read about people who are my age or thereabouts. And I enjoy reading those books, but they're never going to change my life. But I hear from kids over and over again at age 11, 12, 13, 14, that something they've read by me or by somebody else has changed their life and is going to change the way they think about things. And so that makes me take what I do very seriously. I never think of it as a lesser thing because it's for kids. I think of it as more important.
Well, they're very formative years, and I know a lot of your books have done that for my children as well. But let's talk about let's stay general, because that was a perfect segue into The Giver, but I'm not going there yet.
Okay.
Let's talk about inspirations for stories. Are they things that you see every day? Do you have a list of things? Oh, I'm going to get to this, I'm going to get to that?
I always have a list in my mind. The older I'm getting and my memory is slipping a little, I probably have forgotten some of the things that seemed so important at the time that I lodged them in my memory.
Now it's on your iPad, probably.
On my iPhone. But the inspiration for different books come from different places. And when kids write to me and say, how do you get your ideas? I can't think of any ideas. I'm so astounded because ideas are out there all over the place. Mostly in your imagination, but the imagination is triggered by what you read. You do still read, don't you? What you see around you, something you read in the newspaper, something somebody says to you. All of that triggers, if you're a writer, if you're a creative person, ideas. And often those ideas come about because something you see or hear or perceive makes you think, well, what if? And can we segue into The Giver now? Because that's what triggered the origins of the book The Giver, which I wrote probably 20 years ago. You want to go there?
Yes,
now?
let's go there. It's
Okay.
perfect timing.
All right.
Everybody's eager, I think. Do we want to go there? We should go to The Giver, right? Yeah. I think they're ready.
There's always a period of time when I have finished a book and haven't yet started a new book. And during that period of time, sometimes I think, oh, I'm never going to have another creative thought. But then, of course, I do. So I was in that period of time, and my father at that time was in a nursing home in Virginia, where my brother lives. And he was getting old, and he was in an assisted living place. And so I would fly down from Boston, where I lived, about every 6 weeks. And one time when I visited my dad, at a time when I hadn't yet thought what my next book would be, I perceived for the first time that although my father never had Alzheimer's, he was 92 when he died, and memories were beginning to disappear for him. And for the first time, I realized he had forgotten my sister. Now, my sister died young. We were 3 years apart in age. And so it had happened many, many, many years before, but still, I was astonished. Surely the worst thing that had ever happened to my parents, and my father had forgotten it. And when I was driving my rental car back to the airport that day, I thought, well, would that be a good thing to forget sad stuff, terrible moments in your life? Maybe that would be kind of nice. Maybe it was good that Dad just forgot that. And then I thought, but no, he forgot her. Now, since that time, I've lost a child as well, and so I have a new outlook on this, but it's the same feeling I had then. No, we need all of those memories to go together because they make up who we are. And by the time I got back home, I thought that I was going to write a book about people who had found a way to manipulate human memory. Actually, this is kind of creepy, but that is not too far off. I have read recently, they're beginning to find that this could happen. Let's not go there. But at any rate, so when I sat down to begin that story, I realized, oh, it has to be set in the future. Now, I have never been a reader of science fiction or fantasy. Those have not been the kinds of books that appeal most to me, but suddenly I found myself writing one. And that was the origin of The Giver.
It's amazing. I'm sure many of you guys have read Divergent, Hungry, right? All those books. The Giver, I like to quote as being the mother of you've really spawned a whole different genre of literature, which they're calling dystopian fiction.
That was out there already, but not for kids. And when I was in college, I read the classic dystopian literature. You probably did too. Brave New World, 1984.
Right.
And later, I remember as a young housewife and mother, reading and liking very much the book Margaret Atwood, The
Oh,
Handmaid's Tale.
Yep.
Okay, dystopian. But nobody apparently, I've not done the research, but they say that The Giver was the first dystopian novel for
Well,
young
certainly
people.
certainly for young people, and I think it's started to be called now dystopian. So it's interesting, and it'll be interesting to see. There's so many now, and it really created this whole. How do you think history is going to view it? I mean, it's a interesting.
You know, you could say, how will history view vampires? Because
Same thing.
5 years ago, every book was a
Right.
vampire book. So I hope these books won't just disappear into oblivion, but it certainly is a trend, and trends end.
Absolutely.
And we all who write books would like to know what the next trend is going to be, because we want to write that one too.
But for me, what's so fascinating about this literature and The Giver is how it resonates with kids. What do you think it is about the concept of dystopia and dystopian universes that, and you know, I almost want to ask you guys this question
Yeah, I was looking at,
right,
I was
for us to
what
talk
do you
about
guys
it.
think? But I have 4 grandchildren, and the 2 youngest are boys who are 13 and 15. And so my guess is, I haven't asked them this, and you have boys that age as well. I think today's world is so uncertain that kids are more inclined now than I was in the 50s to worry about the future, because they're going to be part of this future that is a little scary now. I mean, I grew up in a time in the 50s when it wasn't. If it was for adults, I certainly didn't know about it. But I think, so kids have more of a sense of wanting to know what role they're going to play in a future that has a lot of implications.
I think that's right. So here you are. You're now in a world of science fiction, if we will, a whole different genre than you've written. Did it take longer for you to write? Tell us a little bit about the process.
I've written books in a lot of different genres, and some of them are for younger kids, and so they're simpler books, and those don't take as long. The Giver took me about a year to write, and then it had to be rewritten. Most often, when I finish a book, not The Giver or its subsequent books, and there are 4 now that comprise that quartet, those are more complex books. So most often when I write a book, it's pretty much finished when I write it. The editor will ask for a few tweaks, but I don't have to go back and start thinking it all through again. But with The Giver, I did. I gave it to my editor, the way I always do. When a book is, I think, finished, and in those days I didn't shoot it by email, but gave it to him on paper. And he didn't quite know what to make of it, because it was so different from all the books I'd written. And so he gave it to several other editors. This was the first time that had happened. Usually it was just he and I. And then I got letters, all in a packet, came from all these different people, and they had all raised questions. And then I had to rethink everything and go back and start from scratch and make my way through it again. And that's why it took such a long time.
Well, in science fiction, there are rules of the community, rules that everything, it all sort of has to base upon it. Let's talk about the community in The Giver. Is it based on something? I mean, we've talked about how the concept of memory is based on an experience with your father. The community itself, did that start with something in your past?
When I wrote that book, when I sat down to write it and realized it was set in the future, and then I decided to make it a community rather than the world, which was a little overwhelming. And so I envisioned a small town, perhaps the size of the one in which I grew up. But at the time, I was living in Boston, in the city, and I would look out my window each day, and I began to think of all the things about the world that existed then, the world I lived in, that were troubling. And so out my window in the city of Boston, I could hear every now and then a car crash, you know, maybe a minor accident at an intersection. And so I thought, in this small community, they don't need cars. And so I made this list. Okay, they have no cars. And then I could see from my window a guy who was always there panhandling, asking for money. And I did away with money. I did away with poverty. And then I did away with divorce. I did away with alcohol. I took out everything that made our lives at that time difficult. And then I became grander. I did away with disease and war. And eventually I had a little town that was absolutely perfect.
Incredible.
And
I love
and
that
I
it just
kind of
starts with
liked
looking
it.
out your window.
I kind of liked it, and I tried to make the reader feel as though, in the beginning of the book, it's really a nice place to live.
Well, that's I mean, the amazing thing about the book for me is that you understand both sides of it. That there is a good reason for the community to
Yeah,
exist. We
yeah,
all
yeah.
love the concept of dystopia, but what are you willing to give up
Yeah.
in order to have
I
that?
tried as the writer, and I'm sure this is true of you as the filmmakers,
Right.
to introduce only gradually the fact that, wait a minute, something's not quite right in this lovely place.
Well, you have to buy into it for
Yeah,
it to
yeah.
work, which certainly did. Let's talk about the success of it. Did you know after the editors come back, you got all this different feedback? Did you have any idea what it was that you had birthed?
No,
Birthed?
nor I think birthed.
Is it birthed or
Birth? I don't know.
Birthed.
Birthed. I don't think the publisher did either. Of course, the publisher, when they put a book out there, they always wait to hear the reaction of the audience. And some of those will be predictable. I think this they just didn't know. What surprised me right away was that I began to get mail from adults. Also from kids. I've always gotten mail from kids. These days it's email, of course. But right away I began to get letters from adults. And not just any adults. I got letters from psychiatrists and from theologians and corporate executives. And I don't even know how the book got into their hands. I'm guessing some kid brought home a book and said, "Dad, read this." And so it immediately attracted a broad spectrum of audience.
Well, there's so much to read in the book, and I think that from the very diverse perspectives that people have, people in a way own the book as their own, because you can read it. It's almost where left, right, all sides meet in the middle, and that's one of the things that fascinated me about it from the very beginning.
You say they all meet in the middle. Not entirely, because another reaction was suddenly people rising up and saying, I don't want my kid to read this book. And when it began
Fear
to
of
be
ideas.
used in schools, I mean, there were school board confrontations and angry people yelling. And I made the mistake once of going to a town where they were having a huge controversy over this book. Why did I think I should be there? I ended up on a stage at an auditorium. And everybody on this side of the auditorium hated me, and everybody on this side liked me. And so I didn't do that anymore because there was no way I was
Feels
going
similar to a place we are right now.
At any rate, that took me by surprise.
And so how did you react to that? It's so fascinating that, a book can stir that much passion from people.
What I found, though, even though I was often asked by newspapers, for example, where there was a controversy, Denver, Kansas City, I think, I was asked by the newspaper to respond to this controversy. I would write a letter, and they would publish the letter in the paper. But what I found was, and this is really neat, was that kids rose up and spoke. And 14-year-olds were speaking at school board meetings, and 11-year-olds were writing a letter to the paper. And those were the ones who were much more, I don't want to say more passionate, because I certainly feel passion for my own books and their circumstances, but they were the ones that really presented the way the audience
Did
felt.
you all hear that?
Yeah.
You guys are the ones who have the
You
power to change
have a
it.
voice.
Don't forget.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about my favorite subject.
Movies?
Yes. We optioned the book many, many years ago. So when you first heard about the interest in making a film out of the book, what were your thoughts?
Okay.
Honest now.
Way back.
Even
no.
though I'm here.
I think prior to that time, there had been 2 movies made of 2 books of mine. I don't know if you even know this. And they were both made for TV movies, which I think, and you can tell me if I'm wrong about this, that sort of means it's a smaller budget, fairly low budget film. I saw both of those movies on TV, and one of them they changed the title, and I was so glad, so that nobody would recognize it as mine. I don't know if any of you here know Boston very well, but one of those books was set in Boston, and part of the plot revolved around the Boston swan boats, which are a landmark in Boston, very famous. Well, it was cheaper for them to make the movie in California. So they built these odd-looking boats, and there are palm trees in the background. It was just, I'm embarrassed even thinking about it. At any rate, I don't recall specifically cringing, and I don't recall if it was you who came to me. This is 20 years ago we're talking about. But I'm curious, so I'm now going to ask you a question. What was it, if you recall, about this particular book that made you think, let's see if we can get this book for film?
Well, it was, first of all, it's smart. It's smart, and there are great characters, and any good film starts with story and characters, and it had all of that.
Same with book. Yeah.
Well, they're same, very similar genres, and I think visually the concept of creating this world and what that could look like was very exciting, but the same fear that is out there was fear about making this, because there's so many thoughts, and it's smart. And it's actually a conversation. It's not all action. It's a lot of ideas, and that was the struggle we had.
How do you get something to look at when the book is inside the boy's brain? What are you putting on the screen?
Exactly, and do it right.
Yeah.
And the one thing, we were only going to do it if we could do it right. This is probably a perfect time. So we put together what we're calling a featurette, which is part of the trailer of the movie, with some of the ideas, a little sneak peek of Lois in there as well. Why don't we show that now, and then we can talk more.
And I've seen several of these. I'm not sure which one this is, but some things have changed, I think, from this.
We experience life through our 5 senses. But what if everything you ever thought, everything you ever knew, was just the surface of what lies beyond?
I began to think about how important memory is. What would happen if we could manipulate human memory? And when a writer begins to think questions like that begin with what if, then a story begins to take shape.
Where to begin? Move closer. Closer. There is no way for me to prepare you for what I'm going to do now. You can take comfort in knowing you are completely helpless. If any of this proves too much for you, tell me immediately.
This is a boy who perceives the hypocrisy of the governing body of his world and perceives something deeply evil there.
If I'm not the receiver, what does that make you?
Well, then that must make me the giver.
Get to see Meryl.
No, we didn't. We've saved her for the next one. So let's talk about another one of my favorite subjects is the adaptation process, book to film. It was very important for us to have you involved and happy. That's an honest thing. But what's your general thoughts? Because it is different medium. We're saying they start from the same thing, but what was your feeling as we started to really go into it? And I can tell you where I was too, but how do you feel about the process?
Well, I happen to be a great lover of movies, so I don't automatically think, oh, book good, movie bad. But I'm also aware, because I love movies and see a lot of them, my car kind of goes on automatic pilot to the movie theater in the town where I live. that a movie can't ever be the same thing as a book. With a book, everybody who picks up a book and reads the words that I wrote is reading a different book because they're forming the pictures in their minds from their own experience and everything they've imagined. And they're reading a different book from the book I wrote because I have a different picture in my mind. But the movie, we're all going to see the same thing. And so you want it to be the right thing, but it's never going to be exactly what I saw. Now, shall we reveal to this audience how many screenplays were written for this?
I think we can, to this audience. Absolutely.
Okay, but don't tell
Yeah,
us so
exactly.
out there.
Exactly. There have been many screenplays because, as Lois said, one of the hardest part about doing this is that Lois's vision of what that community looked like and my vision and your vision are not necessarily the same. And then you bring in a director, and we have a wonderful Australian director named Philip Noyce. You guys know a lot of his movies. He did Salt, he did Quiet American, he did Rabbit Proof Fence and Patriot Games, and he has his vision of it as well. So that was the hardest part about doing it.
Every little detail. For example, I grew up, my father was a career Army officer. I spent part of my young years in Washington. He was on the staff at Walter Reed. But I spent many years living on Army posts. So when I saw this community, I saw it like an Army post with all the houses the same. But, and that's true in the movie. The houses are all the same, but they don't look at all like what I envisioned because they're very modern, which of course they should be. It's in the future.
Right, and we were thinking too of all the things that you normally see. So it's a fun exercise to think about, once the film comes out, you'll all have the same vision of what the community is. Right now, you probably all have very different visions. So it'd be a fun conversation amongst yourselves to think about, what do you think that community looks like? Tell us about Jeff Bridges. So Jeff Bridges has been my partner on this for 17 years. And
over the many years, I have talked to Jeff many times over the phone. As a matter of fact, I one time had a little group of women friends. We just called ourselves the movie group, and we would all go see the same movie, not together, but then we would gather at somebody's house and we would sit and talk about the movie. And one night, my movie group was meeting at my house, and I don't remember what movie we were talking about, but the phone rang, and my husband answered the phone, and then he came to the living room where I'm sitting with all my movie group, and he said, "Lois, Jeff Bridges is on the phone." It was just kind of weird. Everybody's mouth dropped. But at any rate, I felt as though he and I had become friends over the years, although we had never actually met. Once he was in Boston, called and said, "Do you want to have dinner?" And I was going to be out of town. Another time I was in Los Angeles, and he was out of town. At any rate, so I didn't meet him actually until I flew to South Africa last fall, where they were filming the movie in South Africa. And why don't you explain why it was filmed in South Africa?
That's a difficult question. Part of it was that, you know, the community is supposed to be all the blending of the world. That's the way we saw it as filmmakers. And so there's a very interesting extras population in South Africa that felt for us was sort of the blending of a lot of the different skin tones.
It was one of the things I'd gotten rid of when I made that list of what I crossed off, was any kind of, what's the word I want? Discrimination.
Right.
Yeah.
Race, ethnicity, every religion, everybody is
Yeah.
the same.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful place to shoot. We had fantastic crews, and it felt like it made sense for us.
Talk for a minute about the landscape. Once the boy leaves the community and is out there with the baby,
right,
having
you
to make
find a
this
lot of times
difficult
in the
journey.
States that you have to go, you're here for one thing, then you fly here. I mean, South Africa is just this amazing country that really has everything. And we have the journey to elsewhere was there, the community was there. It just really was, it was an incredible, special place. It was a special time for us too, because we were there filming when Mandela died. And I actually have a very good memory of that morning, and Meryl Streep was on set that day, and we had a moment of silence. And the realization that sort of the film that we were creating and the messages in it were, so many of them were so similar to so many of his messages. It was a very powerful moment in the filming process for us.
Now, the movie, see, suddenly I'm asking you
I know,
questions.
I'm going to get into a different
this,
position here.
This will interest people. I think it's probably something they're thinking about. The movie involves also an important character, is a baby. How do you make a movie with a baby in it?
Well, first of all, you find twins.
Yes.
That's the first thing that you have to do. And
There was a lot of crying on that set. Yeah.
there was. I mean, Philip Noyce laughs. He's like, okay, this one, you're giving me babies, you're giving me journeys. We found these incredible twins. And we auditioned, believe it or not, which is the mom carries both babies and you spend a little time with the babies. It's hysterical. I'm not sure why any mother would want to do this, but these babies were incredible. James and Alex. James and Alex feel like additional 2 children for me. I already have 3, so that's getting me close to you now, Lois. And they were so fantastic that we actually filmed some of our final scenes here in Utah, and we flew the babies from South Africa.
Which means also flying their parents.
And flying their parents and the what they call a baby wrangler. That's the woman that works with the babies and the mother. But it's challenging because babies can only work 2 hours a day. They can only be on set 2 hours a day, and a lot of your book involves a baby. With 2 hours a day filming, it was challenging. So if you have twins, then it's suddenly 4 hours a day. But I think the baby steals the show. I'm going to tell you all that, and I hope you'll all write to me after you get to see the full film and tell me whether you agree with me. But I definitely think these babies steal the show. I know we're running short on time, but very quickly, just because I would be remiss not to bring it up, everybody talks to me about the sequel already, which is hilarious because the film's not even out there. But there are 3 other books in this quartet. Gathering Blue, Messenger, and Sun, which just came out a year ago. Sun being the only one that goes back into the world.
Back to that community. Yeah.
What was the thing that said to you, I need to write more of this in this world?
I never intended to, really, but I found, before I wrote the second book, I found myself wondering again about what the world might be like in the future, and again, what if instead of advancing in technology to the point where they could control everything, as in the world of The Giver, what if because of some cataclysmic events they had lost their technology, become very primitive and savage? And that became the second book. I didn't think of it as a sequel to The Giver at all until I was approaching the ending and getting so many letters from kids saying, what happened after, where are they? And I realized I could interject the boy, Jonas, at the end of that second book. I could mention him. And so there is that brief mention. And then in the third book, you do see him. But now in the third book, he's an adult because time has passed. So he's not going to be the focus of the book because the book is for younger people. And so the focus of the book is a younger boy, but Jonas is there, and Gabe is 8 years old. And in the fourth book, everybody is there, and you get to see what happened to all of them.
Well, we laughed because, the ending to The Giver is one of the things. Have all the kids read the book here? Okay.
No spoilers then.
Okay, I don't want to give spoilers because I was going to have people raise their hand because this always fascinates the two of us about the ending. And what happens to Jonas at the end.
And the baby.
And Lois laughed at me when I said, because my opinion, I'm not going to spoil it, so this is going to be difficult. My opinion was slightly different than she was surprised that I had imagined a different ending than she had in her mind, which has also been an interesting thing in the film, is how do we choose to end the book?
Yeah, because the book I could end ambiguously,
Exactly.
and did, and the publisher allowed me to. The movie has to have a more definitive ending. We have a hook arriving.
Yeah, I see that.
Speaking of endings, we're not quite there. First of all, let's have a round of applause for our wonderful conversation. Well, thank you, Lois and Nikki, but we're not quite done because we do have time for some questions from the audience. And I would like to give preference to kids, and here's how we'd like to do this. If you raise your hand and have a question, I'll call on you, and I would like you to give us the name of your school, and then someone will bring a microphone to you. So don't shout out your question, raise your hand, and we'll see how much time we have for questions from different people from different schools. So may I have the first question? Here's one over here, right? Yes, for you. Okay, and tell us what school you're from. Yes, you.
From the National Cathedral School, and I was wondering, did you, Lois Lowry, have any part in the writing of the script of the movie, the Giver movie?
As we said, there have been many screenplays written, and I didn't write any of them. I have no experience in writing a screenplay. I could learn how, but there are other people out there who already know how, and so they were hired along the way, and then various screenplays were rejected for various reasons. And so the final script is written by somebody I've never met, though I've talked to him by email. So no, I wasn't involved in the writing, but they have been very kind in asking my opinion about different parts of the screenplay and of the film. And sometimes they take my advice, and sometimes they ignore my advice.
All right, the next area is going to be in the back section. Is there someone? There we go. And please give your school and give us your name too, please.
My name is Izzy, and I'm not from a school, but I go to St. Patrick's in DC. I'm sure you get this question a lot, but I was wondering what your advice is for young writers that have something but don't know how to get it out there.
I'm not sure what you mean by have something but don't know how to get
Like
it out
they've
there. Are you
writ-
talking about getting onto the page or selling it once it's on the page?
Like selling it or putting it somewhere public.
I believe, I'm not an expert on this, I believe there are websites that publish young writers' work. And I don't know how to tell you how to find those because I don't know about them to the degree that I wish I did. But I also would advise young writers not to be in too much of a hurry to put it out there. It's more important to maintain your relationship to the work with a kind of solitude and introspection, I think, than to rush to present it to the world in a public way.
That's good advice.
Thank you. Okay, yes, right here. Yes, you, please. So
Wait for the microphone so we can hear you.
Yeah.
It's like the old Phil Donahue show.
Exactly.
I'm from Capitol Hill Day School, and I just have a question. How did you pick the cast for The Giver other than just like auditions? How did you know they were the best people to be in the roles?
Well, Jeff Bridges is not just the actor, he's also a producer with me on the film. So the way that happens is, you look at the roles and you break down, it's called a breakdown of the script, and you break down the roles and the ages, which is actually an interesting time for us to talk about this.
Okay.
Because in the book, Jonas is younger than we, and made a decision to age him up for the film, which is something that all writers, all producers face when taking a book. And there's this young, but older than Jonas, Australian actor named Brenton Thwaites, who we had seen his audition, he had read for it, and he was so dynamic and still had that youthful exuberance in Jonas, that wise, a knowledge. There's a knowledge behind Jonas's eyes that we saw in Brenton. And that was probably the hardest casting decision for us, was making the decision to make Jonas not 12. A 12-year-old being the lead in a major film is a very difficult thing. Remember how I told you about the baby only being able to work 2 hours a day? Then all of a sudden you have a 12-year-old who can work 4 to 5 hours a day. So it's a difficult decision, some being the best for the script and some being the best for the production. So we broke down the script, we put lists of people next to it. Meryl Streep was always the person we wanted to go after, and she agreed to do it because her children had read the books and loved the books.
Explain about Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift. Everybody's favorite subject.
Is this a musical? No.
Well, it always makes us laugh when people announce the cast and they announce, Jeff Bridges, Meryl Streep, and Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift has a very tiny role. There's a role in the book called Rosemary, who was the receiver before Jonas. it was a role we decided in order to understand the giver's character, again, the difference between film and a novel, we decided to create a character for Rosemary. And what's funny is we wrote her as somebody piano playing, never thinking about Taylor Swift, and then had been to her concert, and she's a very soulful, interesting young woman, and had this very out-of-the-box idea that maybe it would make sense, that she could be our Rosemary. And she's fantastic. I've spent a lot of time with her, and she had been looking to begin to dip her toe slightly in acting, and she came to South Africa and spent a lot of time with Jeff Bridges. Doesn't sing in the movie, but she does play a little piano. But we had written that for the character before we had looked at 3 other actresses who you wouldn't even know the names of. And she was interested, we were interested. It was one of those things that was timing and just happened. And she does a really wonderful job in the scene that she's in.
Mention Katie Holmes also.
Okay. This is great.
Yeah.
So the mother and the father are the other big roles. And we were looking for people, Katie has had experiences in her life too, where she has been in worlds like the community of The Giver, and she had read the book and was very fascinated by it. So it becomes an interesting balance of going to actors and actors coming to you, because once a project in Hollywood, people know it's being made, then there becomes a lot of interest. And so you get calls at the same time that you're calling people. So the full cast is Jeff Bridges as the Giver, Meryl Streep as the chief elder, Katie Holmes as mother, Alexander Skarsgård plays father, Brenton Thwaites is Jonas, Odeya Rush is Fiona, and Cameron Monaghan is Asher. And then Lily is played by Emma Tremblay, who is a wonderful, wonderful actress.
And now
Young
we know
actress.
all the names.
Yeah.
It's great. 2 more questions, one over here. All right, go ahead, right ahead. Wait for the microphone.
Oh, I'm from Hyde Addison, and in The Giver, which character do you connect with the most?
Maybe Nikki and I would have different answers to that. Oh, that's hard. Most of my books have female main characters, so The Giver has a boy as a main character. It's easier for me to connect to a female because, obviously, I'm female. And yet, of Jonas and his friend Fiona, he actually is the one to whom I feel the closest connection. Hard to answer. I don't feel any connection at all to Mother, who is wonderfully played by Katie Holmes, but Mother is a scary mother, let me tell you.
And there's something about The Giver and the burdens and that push and pull between how much do you hold in, because that's your responsibility, and how much do you try to do to make change in the world.
I think
so there's something
my
to
answer
that.
would be The Giver.
Me too.
Yeah.
See?
The
You have
old
the same
guy.
answer.
Yeah.
We're going to get a question from over here, and why don't we take you right in the middle, okay? Where's the brave? Over here, Sharon. I chose here. We'll do one more over here. Okay.
I'm from Sidwell Friends School, and I was wondering if in any of your books you've ever, just after you published them, realized that you wanted to change something, or if you just try and not think about them so that doesn't happen.
A little of each. I always find things after they're published, and it's too late. I find things I wish I had done differently. And sometimes, oddly, it'll be a small thing that nobody else would notice, but sometimes if I'm speaking to an audience and pick up a book and read a few sentences, I realize that they would flow more smoothly if the words were in a different order. And so I will read them the way I wish I had written them instead of the way they are on the page. There was a second half of that question.
Well, let's take another question.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Someone all the way in the back. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Okay, hi, I'm from National Cathedral School, and so I was wondering, when regarding the giver for like the text itself, not the allegory within, what do you think is the most important message in the book?
For me, I think the most important, I'll preface my answer by saying I don't like the idea of messages in books. I think if you sit down as an author and begin to write a book and think, what message can I put in this, then right away you've ruined the book from the beginning. And yet, once a book is finished and you've told the best story you can, messages arise out of it for the reader. So they are there, but it's a mistake to try to put them there. So having said that, I think the most important thing the book, The Giver, has to say is that we should be very, very careful in the choices we make in this life and the compromises we make. Nikki, what do you think?
I mean, for me, it's always been that there is no good without bad. There is, you know, somewhat no love without hate, that the give and take and the importance of having both, that you can't just give up one for another.
Which is really always the same thing, a compromise.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'd like to call, is there someone from the Calverton School that has a question from back in this corner? Okay. Yes. Are you Calverton? Trying to spread this around a little bit. All right.
So, well, you saw Calverton's from the Calverton School.
Okay.
So, my question is, where did you get the idea for the ceremony of 12?
I'm not sure I remember. You know, I don't sit down with an outline and a carefully thought through plot. I sit down with the characters and a general idea of what the book's about. And then, as I'm writing, I create the plot as I go along. And so that ceremony would have been part of that spontaneous creation. That sounds like spontaneous combustion. And it's interesting because I have not seen the movie Divergent. Is that the one? But I'm told that it also begins with a ceremony.
Lois Lowry wrote the ceremony first.
So maybe that's just a thing that is out there. When we think about the future, maybe it's something that comes to all of our minds, that there would be these monumental events at which decisions are presented. I don't know. I don't remember specifically.
It's in the Hunger Games as well. I mean, that
Hunger
is the
Games,
same.
yes, same
it's
thing.
in all of them.
Ceremony.
Yeah, the
Mine was
reaping.
first.
It was? 100%.
Let's conclude with a round of applause for Nikki and for Lois and for a wonderful conversation, and happy Children's Book Week. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.